Hello, everyone. My name is Teodros Turfe, and I want to thank you all for joining us today for our Twitter space discussion on the promises and perils of accountability for Amhara genocide and negotiations. We'll be starting our space very soon. We just want to give other people a few minutes to join us. Thank you.
Hey guys, hey Ted, hey Hona. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Awesome. Can you hear me, Ted?
Yes, Robert, I can hear you. And I think let's just give everyone maybe others 3 to 5 minutes more to join, and then we can begin. Will
Perfect,
that work? Yeah.
perfect.
Yeah.
So to all those listening, this space will be recorded, but please send the link out to anyone who might be interested to hear it live. This is going to be an interesting discussion. We're going to cover a lot of topics. As Ted said, we're going to start in a few minutes. In the meantime, we'll try and maybe play some music for you guys. So just bear with us.
And Robel, if anyone has, if they want to submit a question, they can send that via DM. Is that correct?
Yes. So if anyone has questions, you can send it through direct message. But in order for your questions to be accepted, you're going to have to state your full name, your location, that is city and country, and then any organizational affiliations. If this information is not included and we cannot verify who you are, then we will not be accepting the question. Thank you. Thank you for that great song, Hone. I think many of us listen to that song often. It's a nice song, and with this, I think we've reached 10 minutes after noon Eastern time, and so I think we can begin. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this session hosted by AAA, Amhara Association of America. The topic of discussion will be Promises and Perils of Accountability for Amhara Genocide and Negotiations. So we're going to be covering a couple of topics, including the ongoing investigation process into atrocities in the Ethiopian War, and AAA's perspective, thoughts role, and so on, as well as the negotiations between the Prosperity Party and TPLF, and what these two things mean for us as a people, what it means for Amhara Genocide, for getting accountability for it, getting recognition. And so, as I said before, if anyone has questions, please submit your questions to us, but to get them recognized, you're going to have to include your full name, location, and any organizational affiliations. This space is going to be recorded, so it's going to be available after this session is complete. You can access it by following the link that you used to join, and so that should be available. Please continue to circulate the link. And with that, I think we can begin. Maybe we can start with maybe let's start with some introductions, maybe with starting from Ted, Hone, and then I can go last.
Sure. Thank you, Robel. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Really excited to have this discussion. I know both of these topics have been in the minds of many Amaras, and we have been actively discussing these topics in our circles. My name is Teodros Terfe. I am the chairman of Amhara Association of America, also known as AAA. I also serve as president of Federation of Amaras in North America, or FANA, and FANA is an umbrella organization for Amara organizations here in the U.S. In my capacity as chairman of AAA, I am responsible for overseeing AAA's projects and activities, interfacing with leaders of other Amara organizations that we partner with, fundraising. I also lead our engagement with U.S. officials on U.S. policy towards Ethiopia, and also communicate on a regular basis with Western media outlets to ensure that our stories, our issues, and our narrative is been covered properly. I'll stop there. Thank you. Hone?
Thank you, everyone, for joining. My name is Hon Amanda Frobelai. I'm a PhD student in Canada. At AAA, I serve as advocacy director, and that entails mainly three components. The first one is coordinating investigations in Ethiopia. We have a dedicated team in Ethiopia that does follow and document atrocities against Amaras. So I coordinate those investigations and production of reports. I also engage human rights organizations, think tanks, to educate them and supply them information about the ongoing Amhara genocide. And occasionally I help out Ted and the rest of the team on media appearances. Yeah, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Ted and Hona. Hello, everyone. My name is Robel. I'm also a PhD student based in Canada. I serve as Director of Communications for AAA, and my responsibilities include handling social media, those types of messaging, as well as assisting with the human rights reporting process, including the editing and formatting of reports. I've also made a few media appearances, and so some of you may have seen me on a few of the Ethiopian medias. And so I think with that, we can pretty much conclude the introductions. Now, maybe we can just talk a little bit about AAA. Ted, if you want to talk about AAA a little bit, and then we can go into some context.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. I'll make this very brief so we can get into our topics. AAA was established in 2016 at the time when the protests were occurring in Gondar and Bahardar. And once we witnessed the response by the Ethiopian military against these peaceful protesters, where dozens of Amhara youth were massacred in Bahardar, and tens of thousands of Amharas were arrested across Ethiopia. We felt that we had an obligation to respond to this, and to speak up on their behalf, to voice their concerns as much as possible, and to ensure and to try our best to influence U.S. policy towards Ethiopia, because we lived here in the United States. Of course, now we have branched out, and then also to ensure that the world, especially the humanitarian organizations, were aware of the genocidal acts that were being committed against the Amhara people. And so over the years, we have established a very good working relationship with the leaders in the House Foreign Affairs Committee members, in the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, with the State Department, the National Security Council. We're readily communicating with these offices. And also over the years, we have had the opportunity to work closely with human rights organizations across the globe and also the Western media to ensure that the stories of Amharas are heard. In addition to that, we did make an investment in Ethiopia to put together a team on the ground to investigate, document, and report on the atrocities that are being committed against Amharas by all the actors. And the foundation of our advocacy, the foundation of our lobbying, is centered on those investigations and the reports that we receive from our team in Ethiopia. In addition to that, as I said earlier, I am the president of FANA, Federation of Amaras in North America, and so AAA works very closely with Amara organizations here in the United States, in Canada, Europe, and New Zealand and Australia to respond to the humanitarian crisis that the Amara people are facing. So, as many of you might be aware, and for those of you that are not aware, we established Amara organizations globally established Bakan Amara Emergency Fund, where we raised about $2 million and provided free meals to over 130,000 Amara IDPs. We actually hired and deployed 40 medical doctors and provided free medical services to over 60,000 Amaras who were displaced during the war, and also provided free psychotherapy training for women, the Amara women and young ladies that were brutally raped by TPLF militias when they invaded the Amhara region, and provided each one of them seed money to start their own small businesses. And all this was done without giving any money to the, coordinating our efforts with the Amhara regional government or the federal government. All of this was done working with independent Amhara organizations in Ethiopia, as well as a committee that we had established in Ethiopia. I'll stop there and in terms of introduction to AAA. Thank you, Hone. Robel.
Thank you, Ted, for the great introduction. And I think you said something interesting, that AAA was established after the violence in Gondar and Bahardar, the protests. I think that's very significant because today, according to the Ethiopian calendar, is Nahase 1, 2008, or sorry, Nahase 1, but then it's the anniversary of the 2008, according to the Ethiopian calendar, massacre in Bahardar. So that was in 2016, August 7th, 2016, in which government security forces used guns to kill protesters. So I think it's very significant that we mention that, given that it's the sort of anniversary of that, and we commemorate the victims of that massacre. And I think it just shows us, as a reminder of why, it is why we do what we do, which is advocating for people who have been targets of a system that has oppressed them for many years. And with that being said, I think we can move on to giving just a little bit of an overview of what's been happening. And so I'm going to try and get into that. I know that the past few months have been very busy, especially 2022. And just to state some of the current events that have happened. Most recently, we've heard about, for example, the blockade of Amhara civilians or people with civilians with Amhara regional ID identification being blocked from entering into Addis Ababa, which is again like it sort of reflects what we've been saying at AAA, which is that Ethiopia, the current system, has an apartheid system. This ethnic federalism. It's a tool that's been abused by the ruling party, which is currently the Oromo Prosperity Party, and previously under the TPLF, to subjugate and dehumanize citizens. So this is second-class citizenship because there's a stratification based on identity. People's identification cards are checked, and then that determines what privileges, what rights that they gain in different parts of the country. And this has also been one of the factors fueling the targeting of Amhara civilians across the Oromia region, across the Benishangul Gumuz region, and across other parts of the country. And for a detailed overview of all of the human rights violations and of an overview of the Amhara Genocide itself in the year of 2021, you can see our annual report. Our annual report covered a lot of the massacres that took place as a result of the war, and then outside of the war, in which multiple belligerents, including the TPLF, including the Oromo Liberation Army, and other actors, how they targeted Amhara civilians and killed many and raped many and committed various other abuses. So I'll try and pin that to the top later, but it just goes to show that this apartheid system continues to be a very unforgiving and malicious tool that's being used against Amharas. Before that, also, we had seen that there were protests held by Amhara students across the Amhara region and across Addis Ababa, across university campuses. And these Amhara students were protesting the massacres of Amhara civilians in Oromia region, specifically in Kalam Wallagga on July 4th, and then in West Wallagga on June 18th. And so these two massacres, part of the Amhara Genocide, claimed the lives of pretty much hundreds, but confirmed civilians, but also by some estimates, thousands. And so these Amharas were targeted by the Oromo Liberation Army, backed by local administrative officials of the Oromo regional government. And this was also compounded by telecommunication blockages to basically ensure that the evidence couldn't come out. A failure by security forces, by the federal and the regional security forces to protect civilians, and in some cases, leaving these posts moments before or hours before these OLA militants would move in and basically slaughter entire communities and villages. And so this was something that not only caused protests back home amongst Amhara students, but also abroad across the country, across the world. So across the United States, across Canada, across Europe, the Amhara diaspora basically united to send a unified message that this was not okay, that they were stood with the victims, and that they condemned the Abiy government for its complicity in allowing this to happen, and also in its failure to protect citizens. And so this basically is just the last few months. And then, as we know, before that, there was all types of other things. There was other attacks, invasions into the areas bordering the Amhara region and Oromia region. There was many communities were still recovering from the war of 2021. And in fact, many communities remain under TPLF occupation in the north, including in the Adiarkai, in Abergele, in Raya, where many thousands of Amhara citizens have been displaced by this TPLF invasion. And so this is the current status quo, essentially, where there are many Amhara IDPs, internally displaced persons, as a result of these constant attacks. And this is happening in the north, it's happening in the south, it's happening in all corners of the country, which has led to an extreme humanitarian burden within the Amhara region and abroad, where Amhara civilians are losing their property. They're getting no support. There's no food. There's no medicine. There's no telecommunications or electricity, even in major cities. Even cities like Gondar don't have water. So this has devastated the entire region, which is home to many millions of people. And so it's very important for us to recognize that, acknowledge that, and understand there's a lot of problems, and this is very symptomatic of a dysfunctional government, in addition to the various violent armed groups that are perpetrating these atrocities. And so if there's anything I missed, Honi or Ted, maybe feel free to jump in. Otherwise, we can move to the next part. Thank you.
I guess I'll add, the crackdown on Amhara political elites and the scale. I think that's very important because in the most recent history of Ethiopia, including the TPLF days, I don't recall this extensive crackdown on Amhara political actors, media commentators, by government statistics itself. Close to 25,000 people, Amharas or residents in Amhara region, have been arrested, and that is unheard of, I think, and it includes also a range of actors. Typically, during TPLF days, they would be hunting down people that are very vocal. In this case, yes, they targeted vocal people that have spoken out against the government, against the Amhara genocide, and including in Addis Ababa. But also they went to the extent of arresting government officials, people, even members of Prosperity Party, simply because they hold a different opinion, primarily about the government's failure to end the ongoing genocide, but also it's a mismanagement of the war and all that. I think we'll unpack that in a moment, but I think one of the most recent developments that's very concerning and is indicative of like where the country is heading, which is probably a one-man authoritarian government, or another hegemony, this time built by Oromo Prosperity Party. Is that the region decided without any significant ground to arrest tens of thousands of Amharas and put them into concentration camps and refuse to present them into a court for months. And I think a significant number might have been freed by now, but still, thousands are still in detention and have not been, have not appeared in front of court. I think that's a very, very unusually, high number of people, but also the nature shows that, the government is going after anyone, including its members, if they dare to speak out against the government. That's what I wanted to add. Maybe we can move into the next topic.
Hone, I think just real quick, I think I'll just take 1 minute. I think it's also important for everyone to be cognizant of the fact that this is really happening at a time when there's high level diplomacy and engagement that's happening right now across Ethiopia and really Africa as a whole. There has been an extended visit by the new special envoy, the third one from the United States, Mike Hammer, along with the U.S. envoy, the EU envoy, Annette Weber, visiting Ethiopia for an extended period of time. Obasanjo has traveled to the country on August 4th. And also China has been visiting that area as well, and they do have a special envoy to the Horn of Africa. Lavrov, the foreign minister for Russia, also visited Ethiopia along with other African countries. So there's been a lot of diplomacy in Ethiopia and across Africa as a whole by the major powers, really in the past month. So we can jump into our topic.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, Ted. So the way we designed this conversation to flow is, after giving, recap of the recent important developments, we wanted to focus on two major topics that are really important at the moment. The first one is, the work of the International Commission of Human Rights Experts on Ethiopia. I believe most people have been following the development is in that front, but we want to focus on what is the potential in there about in terms of like ensuring accountability for Amhara genocide. So we're gonna address that question first, and then we'll go into another important topic, which is the prospectus of negotiation with TPLF, the development there, and again we will ask two questions in relation to the negotiation. First, will it potentially end the war? And second, does it have a mechanism to ensure, there's accountability for Amhara genocide, but also I think the overall accountability for war crimes perpetrated in the course of the almost 2 years war now. So I'll begin with a brief presentation or rather outlining of Triplet's view of the work of the International Commission of Human Rights Expert on Ethiopia. It's abbreviated as ICHREE, which is kind of difficult to say. So I'll be referring it as the Commission for short. But I want to begin with recapping the mandate this commission is given I think, as many of you know, this commission was established by the UN Human Rights Council in its session in December 2021. And it was intended to really centralize the call for investigation of what's happening in Ethiopia and also outlining an accountability mechanism. I think there were different efforts by international organizations, including Amnesty, Human Rights Watch, and others. Obviously, there was a lot of media coverage of alleged atrocities in different parts of the country. So the UN Human Rights Council decided to establish this commission for a period of 3 years, renewable each year, every year as necessary, to basically conduct a thorough and impartial investigations of these allegations of violations and abuses of human rights and criminal laws and international humanitarian laws as well. So I think it's intended to kind of centralize or at least consolidate the ongoing investigations, but also they are tasked to really advise the government on, after the investigation, on how transitional justice could be served in the context of this war. And I think they are mandated to outline a mechanism of accountability, reconciliation, and healing, and also provide technical assistance to the government if the government is willing to take upon their recommendations about how to go on those important themes. The way this commission is designed is I think it emphasizes heavily on gender perspective and a survivor-centered approach, which is not surprising given the widespread allegations of rape, and of course our investigations into Amhara, the incidents in Amhara region have confirmed that TPLF militias have raped thousands of Amhara women and girls. So I think in light of those confirmed reportings and widespread allegations in other areas, this commission is explicitly tasked to integrate gender into its investigation. As part of its process, obviously the commission is tasked to engage relevant stakeholders within the government, such as the government's interministerial task force, the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission, and others to try to build a consensus, or rather, I would say, critical mass around accountability for those atrocities. So the commission is at the moment located in Entebbe. I think they've been working from Uganda. It's obviously there are three members of the commission, but as just any similar kind of group, these commissioners are supposed to have their own staff, their own advisors in different areas. So I think in light of this, I think there was a lot of many questions about what is the difference and the relationship between this new commission that was established in 2021 and the joint investigation team that conducted investigations into the alleged human rights abuses and violations of humanitarian law and war in Tigray. I think the first thing to keep in mind is, the joint investigating team, the joint investigations team was a state initiative. So the way it happened was the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission, which is a para-state organization, requested the United Nations Office for Human Rights Commissioner to collaborate with it to investigate alleged violations in Tigray, and they accepted, and therefore it was primarily a state initiative, a state initiated process or team, while as the commission is a UN mandated and initiated process. So I think there's a key difference in there in terms of implication for how the findings of this commission will be taken by other organizations within the UN system, but also the possibility of using evidence for future accountability, both within the UN system or outside. Of course, the JIT, the Joint Investigation Team, was primarily focused on Tigray and hardly said anything about the widespread crimes committed by TPLF outside Tigray. And whereas this independent commission, in its mandate is Ethiopia-wide, there's only one limitation or one restriction when it comes to the scope of the investigation, which is the incidents have to be somehow related to the war that broke out on November 3rd, 2021. But there's no geographical restriction, and therefore they can look into any crimes committed in Oromia, for instance, by Oromo Liberation Army, because technically the Oromo Liberation Army is a partner in the war and is a party in the war, I think. But also, TPLF is still in active partnership with Oromo Liberation Army, so could be implicated by any crimes committed by Oromo Liberation Army, because they're still in working collaboration. The commission has a clearer mandate, I guess, and that is, you are going to investigate any violations of human rights, international humanitarian law, refugee law, and all that. So I think part of the question related to the previous JIT was, why they didn't include that, why they didn't include this, and all that. So I think probably there was a learning made out of that, and this one has a bit of clearer mandate, at least from our perspective. And it's promised to and design thinking accountability purposes. Obviously, the JIT and the commission said that they will build on the investigations or the findings of the JIT. So they officially adopted what they called the complementarity principle. They're not going to investigate the same incidents, or at least they're not going to repeat the investigations made by the JIT. They are going to build on those reports. So that's also an important, way how the commission is, in a way, taking up the joint investigation report as a basis to build on. And obviously that was one of the key demands of the Ethiopian government. And I think the commission clarifying that and explicitly said they're going to complement the JIT findings instead of redoing everything. Perhaps that was one of the reasons why the Ethiopian government has decided to change its stand on the commission, because from the very beginning the Ethiopian government was adamant, saying no, they're not going to recognize this commission. But since the commission officially published its interpretation of the mandate in terms of, terms of reference, the Ethiopian government has been engaging the commission, and recently, as all of you know, they were allowed to come into Addis Ababa to negotiate access to different areas they want to go to conduct their investigation. So we overall saw, this commission as an opportunity, because at AAA, we've always been calling for independent investigation into the Amhara Genocide and independent investigation into particularly the massacres in Oromia, because the government is technically part of the perpetrators of the Amhara Genocide, and therefore cannot investigate its own crime. And therefore, we've been strongly advocating for an international independent investigation, and we thought this commission could provide an aspect, or at least some direction to that goal. So we've been engaging with them. We have had rounds of meetings with their staffs, and we have submitted appropriate documents and information to support their work in Ethiopia. But we're also, not naive to miss the challenges the Commission is facing. both in a way it's designed, but also in a way, practically it's a relation with the Ethiopian government. I think before going to like the concerns we have, let me just say that we think that this is the first UN mandated investigation into parts of Amhara genocide, because we've said, as I said earlier, technically the commission should look into massacres that have been committed over the last 2 years in different parts of Ethiopia. So there's a potential of this being the first UN mandated investigation on Amhara genocide. It should provide an opportunity to balance, the disproportionate attention, given in terms of, atrocities in Tigray versus other atrocities elsewhere. Because of the complementarity principle, we do expect the commission to kind of, give better coverage of, atrocities committed outside Tigray. So it should give an opportunity to really rebalance the attention when it comes to atrocities committed across different parts of Ethiopia by bringing attention to the atrocities committed beyond Tigray. It could also set precedent for future investigation of Amhara genocide in other regions that are not necessarily part of the ongoing war in northern Ethiopia. And there's also, so in a way, its precedent is important, because once the government has agreed to this, technically all parties involved in this investigation should quite easily agree for future in-depth investigations, because there's already a precedent set by this investigation or by this commission. Obviously, TPLF has benefited in its narrative from the lack of attention to its crimes committed by its militia in Amhara region and its partners in Oromia region. So we hope that this investigation will finally give the world an opportunity to see the true face of TPLF and debunk this wrong notion of these armed groups that are unfairly treated and the underdogs and all that. I think they benefited out of that image for a long time, and I hope this commission will unravel some of their crimes, and therefore, the world will hopefully see the true face of TPLF. That being said, I think there are concerns in relation to what extent the commission can cover incidents or atrocities committed in different parts of the country, and also in terms of timeline. But first of all, I think we are very concerned about the lack of access by the government. We believe that the government is trying to, hide its complicity, its role in the ongoing Amhara genocide by refusing access or by selectively telling the commission to go into its preferred places. And I think that is very concerning, and will be unfair and unjust to the victims if this commission is not given complete access to go to Oromia, to go to Amhara region, to go to the areas that were not investigated previously. And also, I think we understand the setting up of the commission has taken a long time, and therefore, I think the commission is supposed to present its findings in mid-September to the 51st UN Human Rights Council session, and also after that to the UN General Assembly. So we are very concerned that they don't have enough time to look into enough number of incidents and also do in-depth investigation. So that might end up whitewashing some of the crimes committed by TPLF, OLA, and the government forces. And another concern we have is the case selection could be influenced by works of other human rights organizations such as Amnesty and Human Rights Watch, which at AAA we appreciate the work they do, but we've always criticized their disproportionate attention into Tigray and ignoring the atrocities committed elsewhere, particularly when the victims are Amharas. And we look forward to understanding how the commission will select particular cases, because if the commission is going to follow up the work of this human rights organizations to decide on cases, I think that will be repeating the disproportionate attention or kind of unbalanced coverage to atrocities throughout Ethiopia. So those are some of the concerns we have when it comes to the commission. But I think at AAA we have always said international independent investigation is necessary, and that should be extensive, and therefore we hope that the mandate of the commission will be renewed. So that's one of our advocacy goals in moving forward. We want to see the mandate of the commission to be renewed, and we will also continue to supply information. Obviously, they had a portal where you submit information, but the deadline has passed. But hopefully, following the renewal of the mandate of the commission, they will look into more cases and more extensive area, and therefore we call upon our supporters and anyone concerned for justice and accountability in Ethiopia to continue to supply information. I'll stop there and invite Ted and Robert to add anything I missed, and then we might also address any questions that might have been addressed from the audience. Thank you.
Robert, go ahead first. If you have anything to add, and then I'll chime in after you.
I don't think I had anything significant to add. The main thing was that I think Hona earlier on in the context section, I forgot to mention the mass crackdown and the massive toll that had on the community in terms of jailing thousands of Amhara, journalists, activists, politicians, community leaders, and Fano veterans. And this also prompted the global Fano movement. So this was a series of rallies, demonstrations, in some cases even candlelight vigils that were held in commemoration of the victims, and people basically gathered to call for their release. So that was just one minor thing I missed. Otherwise, I think Hona did a great job at covering it.
All right, thank you, Robel. And Hone, thank you for that really excellent detail in terms of like the ICHRE, their mandate, and also our engagement with them. The one thing I do want to communicate to the Amhara community is that the discussions that we've had with the ICHRE has been really very fruitful. It was really gratifying to know that they are familiar with our organization, our reports, and that they have been reviewing our reports. And as Hone mentioned earlier, we have provided significant number of our reports to them and information that they need to conduct a thorough investigation. And it's one thing to it's, and these discussions really help in terms of like the commission understanding our perspective, our views, because they're new to this, and that face-to-face conversation makes a difference. And we will continue to engage this commission as they move forward through their investigation process. In addition to that, I ask and invite all of you to go to the UN Human Rights Council website and view all the information that's out there. And as Hone was saying, one of the things that he mentioned was the timeline. It is concerning for us because if you see when these commissioners were appointed, the last appointment of the commissioner was on June 28th. So this is the commission. The final appointment was June 28th. This team had to go and put their, this commission had to go and put their investigative body together, their staff together. So they have not been given a lot of time to conduct a really, thorough investigation and to do these investigations remotely. um, it's not easy, especially given the the problems, the telecom problems we have in Ethiopia. The network is very sketchy. Getting a hold of people is not easy, and also there's translations issues, language issues. So there's a lot of challenges that this team has to overcome in a very short period of time, and that's why we're hoping that this mandate will be renewed. And I think as Amaras, all of us should campaign for this mandate to be renewed, because this is the first time that an international body, an international organ, is conducting an independent investigation, against these, massive massacres, genocidal massacres that have been committed against Amaras. That should be part of our focus, is to demand that this mandate be renewed. I'll stop there, and let's take some questions from people. And also, Robert, if there's already questions that have come in through our DM, maybe we can address those first.
Okay, sounds good, Ted. I'm checking right now. Let me see. There's none on my end. Maybe on your end, if you could check if there's any questions.
Well, I guess perhaps if there are none, maybe we can come back to it after our outlining of our take on the negotiation. In the meantime, people can think of questions and deem us those questions, or there will also be an opportunity to speak later. I said, Robert, if there are no questions, I guess we could go to the next.
Sounds good. Yeah, so there's no questions. So next, we can transition to the negotiations between Prosperity Party and TPLF. This is another substantial topic, which has very great implications, as we see that these negotiations are underway, with both sides trying to issue glimpses of what's going on. But from the Amhara perspective, it's important that we voice our concerns, our perspective, and really outline, what is the role for Amharas here, and I think this is something that we can unpack. But starting with this topic, maybe we can start with context behind the negotiations, who are the parties to the war, and then why the parties agreed to the negotiations. Ted, if you want to cover that part.
Sure. I'll just try to kind of maybe set the stage for this, for a much more detailed discussion, or by Robel and Hone, and then we can go to Q&A. Um, War really has a very devastating impact on a country, as we've seen in this war in northern Ethiopia. Thousands of civilians have been killed and maimed. Thousands of women and underage girls raped, and millions displaced. There's been massive destruction of infrastructure, especially civilian infrastructure. We're talking about thousands of schools, hospitals, businesses, and famine and food insecurity, and also leading to a very polarized society, and has really set back Ethiopia decades. Um, you know, One thing I do want to mention is that prior to the outbreak of the war, as an organization, AAA had been alerting congressional offices, State Department officials, and our partners really of an imminent war. I think not just AAA, but I think many Ethiopians felt that war was really impending. For majority of Ethiopians who lived under the tyranny of TPLF since the early 90s, we understand and understood that TPLF would not accept anything less than full domination of the political, military, and economic segments of Ethiopia. It is what TPLF was accustomed to and what they had been preaching to their followers for decades. So anything less would be unacceptable. But this warning, this alerting was really not heeded by anyone. And unfortunately, the international community, usually the case will just come in, after the fact. The one thing to note, and it's really important for everyone to understand, that the war between the TPLF and the Abiy administration is not a war over ideology, but a war over power. who's going to have central power in Ethiopia. There is no difference in ideology between the TPLF and the Abiy-led Oromo Prosperity Party over the governance system in Ethiopia. They both believe in the ethnic apartheid system. TPLF used this ethnic apartheid system to establish Tigray hegemony, and Abiy is using the same system to try to establish Oromo hegemony. So it was really known to many Ethiopians that the war would happen. When we saw the TPLF, recruiting, training, and arming militias across Tigray to start the war, and they did. They attacked the ENDF in Tigray, and the war started. And as a result, the impact has been devastating. Now, I think, unfortunately, what gets lost in all of this is that when the Abiy administration called for a unilateral ceasefire in June of 2021, after 6 months in Tigray proper, the TPLF invaded the Amhara region and the Afar region around July of 2021. And they quickly went through and occupied most of Wollo, parts of Shua, parts of northern Gondar, and even came all the way up to South Gondar. And as a result, thousands of Amhara civilians were killed. Thousands of Amhara women were raped, and schools were destroyed. Hospitals were destroyed. Um, and this was also happening while Amaras were being massacred in Oromia region, displaced by hundreds of thousands, and also in Metekel. So the impact on the Amara society in Ethiopia, both by the invasion of into Amara region by TPLF and OLA, and also the attacks against civilians in Amara region, in the so-called Oromia region and Benshangul Gumuz region, is really something that requires, we hope one day, a very thorough and independent investigation, because it had a devastating impact on this society. Um, in addition to all the destruction that the TPLF committed in the 6 months that they occupied most of these areas, they also prevented aid agencies from coming and providing, aid to the Amharas. There was a complete telecommunication shutdown. As many of you remember, there was a demand by the international community at the time when the Ethiopian military was in Tigray, a demand for telecom services, electricity services to be enabled in Tigray. But there were no such calls when the TPLF had invaded and occupied, nearly 6 million Amaras in Wollo, Shoa, and parts of Gondar. Telecom was shut down. There was no electricity, and there was no aid being provided to this population. Fortunately, there was a massive mobilization by Amaras across the region, and they fought back. And really, what it turned out, what we witnessed and what many people have been reporting, it became really a people-to-people war. The TPLF mobilized really many Tigray civilians to fight in this war, and the same thing happened in the Amhara region. Fortunately, the TPLF was dislodged from most of Amhara region. Their logistics was hampered, and as a result, many of these places were freed. Unfortunately, there are still areas within Amhara region that's still under the occupation of TPLF. Robel mentioned some of them, including North Gondar of Adarkai, North Wollo, a part of Raya, um, the areas of some areas of Wagamra. And there hasn't really been the calls by the international community for the TPLF to leave these areas. And as an organization, and many Amara organizations really across the globe, we have been demanding for demanding for the international community to pressure the TPLF to leave these areas, so that these Amara civilians are no longer occupied, so that humanitarian aid can flow, so that they can build their lives. Now, in terms of the negotiations, why are there negotiations, happening right now? And it's really for different reasons are why we think the negotiations are about to start. Um, for the from the Abiy administration side, he's really submitting to the international pressure. There has been pressure by the international community demanding for cessation of hostilities and also for negotiation to end this war. And that has been put on the really more on the Ethiopian government side. And Abiy is really appeasing to that pressure that's coming from the international community. Also, for Abiy, it's advantageous to do that right now, while while Amaras do not have a strong political representation to represent them in any negotiation. So there's really two reasons. For TPLF, there's a lot of reasons for wanting to do this. Now, one thing that's different from from TPLF and also for the Abiy administration, the TPLF through the most parts of the war had been calling for negotiation when they were losing or when they were winning. And I think when part of the reason for that is really, to make to try to have the high moral ground, to when they call for negotiations, even when they were not sincere about it, right? But right now, when after, losing and being dislodged from Afar region, the Amhara region, the TPLF, as I said earlier, they lost a significant amount of manpower, resources, military hardware, and this is a way for them to also buy time. As the food aid is coming in, from the aid agencies, it's not only going into civilians, but this food is also going to be used to feed the fighters. As oil and gas is coming in, and to be provided for the civilian population, it's also going to be used for the TPLF war machine. So part of it is also to buy time. The other reason is they see the same thing as Abiy. The Amhara movement is gaining momentum. The Amharas are becoming stronger and stronger and stronger. They're organizing not just in Ethiopia, but also globally. And it if they can get what they want right now, while Amharas are not strong politically, it's to their advantage. Um, so part of the calculation we believe for TPLF is, there's nothing to lose by moving forward in negotiations while they buy time, while also Amaras do not have a strong, are being excluded from the negotiations, right? So Abiy and the TPLF, do not it's to their advantage to exclude Amaras from the from any negotiations, and that's really what's happening, right? And from the international community, the mistake that they are making is looking at this from as a as really a binary conflict between the TPLF and the Abiy administration. There are other actors in this war. There's the Amaras, Afar, and the Eritreans, and all of these groups are being excluded. And what we saw yesterday, or a few days ago, in a briefing by Obasanjo to the African Union, is inviting Eritrea to be part of the negotiation. We think that's a positive step, but also but we also think that the Amhara should be invited to the negotiations as well. But anyhow, coming back, there is a calculation for the TPLF, to move forward with the negotiation to see what they can get through this. I think I've kind of covered in terms of like what the incentive is for what we believe for the TPLF wanting to negotiate. If I've left something off, Hone Robel, looking at my notes, I don't think I have, but please chime in, and then Robel, I'll turn it over to you in terms of like who are the different actors and what is it that they want. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much, Ted.
One other thing I think that's important to cover is a lot in these negotiations. What's absent in this also, when the international community is pushing for the negotiations, is the violence that's happening against Amaras outside of the context of this war in Oromia and Benshangul Gumuz, and also really in Addis Ababa as well. And that's why we feel having an Amhara voice in these negotiations is critical, because all these other issues will be brought into this context.
If I may add one thing, I think Ted has mentioned like the cause of the war is not ideological difference as wrongly depicted in many discussions. I think it's a fight over power. It's a fight over influence, and part of the reason why TPLF was rushing through a war or wanted to start the war is because they felt like the longer they waited, their relative influence in Ethiopia, their resource base will be shrinking, and therefore they wanted to kind of had the war, which they thought is necessary to restore their influence in Ethiopia in their own time. And that's why I think there was a lot of provocation, unnecessary attempts to escalate the difference by conducting their own election, by making provocative statements and all that. I think people need to understand as we talk about the negotiation, we need to also keep in mind, like, not only what the end game for TPLF is, but also why the war broke out at that particular time. I think the immediate causes are, events, but I think beyond that, we need to understand that TPLF wanted to have this war in their own time, and they thought like waiting longer will disadvantage them vis-a-vis, Abiy consolidating its power and all that. So I think it's important to keep that in mind.
Thank you, Hone. Thank you, Ted. Very comprehensive discussion. Next, I think we can also address just what the different parties want from the negotiations. And this is based on previous statements that they've made, communications, as well as just an analysis of the current climate. So starting with the TPLF, it's become apparently clear that one of the major points of this war has been the territory known as Welgait. So this has been something they've stated as a red line, and the international community has referred to this as Western Tigray. This is a territory that was forcibly occupied and annexed by the TPLF, one of the early sites of Amhara Genocide, very horrific atrocities against Amhara, the indigenous Amhara residents of Welgait. And so as a result of this war, the area was actually liberated, and then this became now a central part of TPLF's negotiation demands as a red line. The purposes of why they wanted Welgait is something that maybe can be left to another discussion, but just in a nutshell, it provided a border with Sudan, an international border that could have helped them to fuel their war. There were benefits with their economy. There is, food production benefits because of the aridness of the rest of the Tigray region, which has been historically not conducive to farming, grain production, and all of these things, and for other reasons as well. And then next, there was the desire for them for their government to restore telecommunications, banking services, and these types of necessary goods. This was something that was actually also repeated by the recent, by the U.S. delegation led by the special envoy, which recently visited Tigray, and there was an interaction with the TPLF leadership, including Debretsion and Getachew Reda, and there was the infamous selfie. He took a picture with these two leaders, but following that trip, there was definitely this sentiment was echoed by them as well. Another one of TPLF's demands has been for compensation for alleged destruction of the region, accountability for atrocities. But then when we actually look at the strategic benefits, so these are things that the rest of the country looking at this war can kind of surmise. There's this notion of, sorry, can you guys hear me? Well,
yes, we can hear you, Robert. Yeah.
Okay, sorry. So strategically speaking, TPLF, as we mentioned before, has been very opportunistic when it comes to going between negotiations and warfare. And so there's always another ulterior motive. They can hardly be seen by anyone as a good-willed actor when it comes to these things. When it comes to the agreements, they have a long history of reneging or betraying those that they've formed alliances with. But really, this can be seen also as buying time, a buying time tactic to prepare for an offensive. So there have been previous reports of appropriating the humanitarian aid and other resources, the food, the oil, and even somehow acquiring their military hardware to wage war. This is a long time tactic, and then the timing is opportunistic because this negotiation comes at a time when the Amhara people lack a strong independent political representation. So this is something that the TPLF could have seen as a benefit for their own interests, negotiating with the Oromo Prosperity Party, which can't be seen as a genuine representation for the Amhara people, because even when it comes to the other members of the Prosperity Party who are allegedly ethnic Amharas, these individuals were part of the state structure, both under Prosperity Party and under TPLF, which basically oversaw the terrible atrocities against the Amhara people, dating back all the way to the early years of the EPRDF coalition. And so this negotiation can also be seen from the lens of trying to strategically create an allyship between TPLF and the Prosperity Party, while broadening the rift between Abi and Amharas, as well as Abi and Eritrea. And as we know, Eritrea played a decisive role throughout this conflict, as from the beginning when TPLF started the war, there was an attack on both fronts, on both the Amhara front as well as the Eritrean front. And so the final really motivation is that by consolidating influence in Ethiopia, the TPLF can once again pursue this old notion of having disproportionate power. So before the war, there was already a very disproportionate militarization of the Tigray region in compared to the other regions of the country, including Amhara region, Oromia region. There was clear military parades, and this notion has definitely not been abandoned by the TPLF leadership. In fact, they've stated that they have no intention of disarming, and they want to build up their military capacity, which actually poses a security threat for their neighbors. So whether it's Eritrea, whether it's Amhara, whether it's Afar, or the rest of Ethiopia. And so that pretty much sums up TPLF. If we move on to Abi and the Oromo Prosperity Party, which we'll be treating as one and the same right here, the number one intention that can be seen from especially our perspective is that this agreement comes as a tactic to weaken the Amharas. So by forming, again, a strong alliance between the Prosperity Party and the TPLF, the Amharas get antagonized, and then there's this long time mentality shared amongst the Prosperity Party elites, particularly in the Oromo Prosperity Party, in which there's a strong anti-Amhara sentiment, and so Amharas are seen as political adversaries. This is a notion that's been ingrained within the Prosperity Party coalition, but also previously in the EPRDF coalition, and this goes back to the constitution, to the ideologies that made the formation of these coalitions, and so this has been inherited by the Prosperity Party. As we know, the Oromo Prosperity Party was previously the OPDO, the Oromo People's Democratic Organization, or the ODP, Oromo Democratic Party, and so these parties were, directly responsible for, or these parties were this party was a member of the EPRDF coalition, just as now it's leading the new Prosperity Party coalition, and so there's a continuity there. The same mentality it seems has carried forward, and so by reinventing the alliance with the TPLF, there can be a consolidation of power. And this consolidation would basically cement and consolidate the new beneficiaries of the ethnic apartheid order, which is creating Oromo hegemony. Previously, under the EPRDF, which was dominated by the TPLF, there was Tigrayan hegemony, in which ethnic Tigrayans enjoyed societal benefits just on the basis of their ability to speak the Tigrayan language, their Tigrayan ethnic identity, as we mentioned before, the use of identification cards to confer different benefits based on identity, which is, by definition, one of the cornerstones of an apartheid state. And in some cases, even having this as a criteria for whether people in a certain area are actually ethnically cleansed or spared. So this is also one of the direct contributors to genocide. And so this is the primary vision behind this negotiation from the Prosperity Party. Of course, Abiy was strong-armed into this by the international pressure, the Western pressure. So it also seems that he is committing to this in order to appease the West for his own political interests, and then using the outcome of the negotiations as a way to silence the other questions of the Amhara people. And so previously we talked about Welkait. It was disputed between the Amhara and the Tigray as a red line in this, but there's other territories that have also been contested that were actually subjects of annexation with the implementation of the ethnic apartheid system. And so, for example, Addis Ababa, the capital city, is now facing an encroaching threat by the Oromia Regional Administration. There's Dera from Shoa, which is pretty much a counterpart of Welgait in the south, a majority Amhara district that was annexed by the Oromia region. There's Matakkal, and there's Raya. So all of these were majority Amhara districts that were annexed, and then the constitution essentially cemented their validity. And now, by presumably, the intention seems to be that if Welkait is restored to Amhara, as per the tradition, there could be created a pretext for the requests of these other territories, which would not be desirable by the Oromo Prosperity Party, by Abiy Ahmed. And so when we talk about consolidation, this could also be a means of subjugating the Amhara Prosperity Party further. So if they are subjugated, it just consolidates the Oromia Prosperity Party's control over the Amhara region. And by controlling the Amhara region, it would basically make way for long-term consolidation of the country, as it would have control over some of the central countries with a very significant part of the country's population. And then lastly, by weakening, there could also be an intention to weaken the central government to prepare for a secession or a confederate arrangement. And this goes back into the traditional Oromo nationalist desire to create an independent Oromia. And this has been a cornerstone of the OLF ideology, the Oromo Liberation Front, which is a political movement that was formed in parallel to the Tigray People's Liberation Front. That was an equivalent for the Oromo people. And this ideology has close ties with many of the ethnic Oromo parties, including the Oromo Prosperity Party. And so that concludes the Abiy and our Oromo Prosperity Party. And now we can move on to the Amhara. So the Amhara perspective here is complicated because here we're speaking as a people, and we're not actually talking in terms of the representation. So at this time, the Amhara people are not represented as an independent voice, with an independent voice, but rather the Prosperity Party is attempting to speak for them. And so the Amhara people obviously reject this as these people are not seen as legitimate. But if we're talking from a genuine Amhara perspective, an independent Amhara perspective, really it comes down back to the red line of restoring Welgait and Raya. As we said, Raya is under, parts of it remain under occupation by the TPLF. As for Welgait, although parts of it have been liberated, some parts, especially in the Talamth region, continue to be under TPLF occupation. As Ted mentioned earlier, one of the central concerns as really a precondition for any type of goodwill negotiations is the immediate withdrawal of the Tigrayan forces from Amhara region, including Adi Arkai or / North Gondar, North Wedlo, and Wag Himra. And so this is very important. And then another aspect of these negotiations is really justice and accountability for the Amhara genocide, because the Amhara genocide, although it's a very wide concept that's that sort of spans many years, there was essentially a chapter that was opened in the midst of this war. So there was very, very significant atrocities, very significant part of the genocide that was committed against Amhara people by the TPLF, by the OLA, in the context of this war. And so in the context of this war, accountability for these war crimes is absolutely essential. Restitution and rehabilitation is very important because the Amhara region itself was devastated as a result of this occupation. There was actually significant damage sustained by many major cities throughout the region. The cities were completely razed, property was destroyed, it was looted, heritage sites were destroyed and looted, all the way from government buildings to schools to hospitals to businesses to museums. And so there's a very, very large toll here, perhaps in number greater than the damage seen in any other region value-wise. And so this would be undoubtedly an important aspect of any negotiation. And for Amharas, there would also be a significant value to having an official apology from TPLF for the narrative that instituted scapegoating Amharas, because the scapegoating Amharas, politics was something that was really pushed forward by the TPLF as primary perpetrators of the Amhara genocide, starting from the 90s at least. And this scapegoating goes back to their manifesto, in which they framed as Amhara people as their enemies. And so this is really important. This is all comes as part of justice and accountability for the Amhara genocide and reconciliation in order to move forward and ensure peace and stability. And moving forward, there's also going to be the recurring issue of the Constitution. The Constitution has been something that Amhara people have issued grievances against for many years, including when Abiy's government came to power. This was one of the central questions of the Amhara people. And so when it comes to this war, the Constitution can be seen as having had a large role, because the TPLF on the one hand would say that the matter of Walqait must be resolved under the Constitution. Perhaps the Oromo, or rather, the Oromo Prosperity Party would also agree with this sentiment. But Amharas, on the other hand, would say, listen, this land annexation actually happened, especially in Walqait, before the implementation of the Constitution. And this was also a process in the 90s that actually excluded the Amharas, that didn't incorporate the Amharas, a significant majority in the country. And so agreement on a reform process would be essential in order to promote a popular approval of this process. And then it's really important that Amharas enjoy some autonomy in organizing self-defense and for the respect of the culture of Fano. And when we say this, really, it goes back to TPLF, for example, wanting to actually preserve its army and actually build its army for stated self-defense, meaning that this would essentially be a lasting threat, a security threat to its neighbors, including Amharas. In fact, Amharas would be pretty much the most highly threatened by this military presence. And so over the course of the war, the military advances of the TPLF were largely thwarted by the efforts of Fano, Fano being volunteer Amhara militias. So these are Amhara militias that are not associated with the regional government or the government structure in any way, that are not paid, that are not compensated, that went out to volunteer to defend their land. And so these were actually people, the Fano were highly victimized in the recent mass crackdown by the Abiy regime. And this mass crackdown can be seen as having, as encroaching on the autonomy and self-defense of the Amhara people. And with the looming threat of the TPLF waging an imminent invasion, it's really important that this be respected. And so along the lines of the mass crackdown really targeted people also who were politically critics of the government over its policies over the TPLF. For example, the government's failure to liberate areas that are still under TPLF occupation. And so one of the primary demands of the Amhara people would be the immediate release of all political prisoners. So this means that the journalists, the Fano veterans, the activists, And all of these such people who were arrested in this mass campaign that targeted thousands of people would have to be immediately released. And then, of course, for Amharas, the number one way to achieve security and to actually ease the sense of war would be to simply have the TPLF disarm. And if the TPLF were to disarm, this would essentially solve a lot of the problems with tension in the region between the TPLF and Amhara, between TPLF and Afar, between TPLF and Eritrea. And so this summarizes the Amhara. And then lastly, we have, or second to last, we have the Afar and Eritrea question. Afar and Eritrea, we don't want to speak for them because I think it would be more suitable for representatives from that community to do so. But really what's important is that there's sustainable peace, which requires an inclusive process. And so these two entities, which were actually part of the process, which were belligerents in the war, which were victimized and affected by the war, deserve a seat at the table. And as we said before, Eritrea was actually offered that opportunity by the African Union, which is a good step. Afar should be offered the same opportunity, separate from PP, our Prosperity Party, just as we said, Amhara should be offered the same opportunity, separate from Prosperity Party. And so both have security stakes in relation to TPLF. And lastly, the international community, Western countries, China, as we know, we live in a multipolar world. So all of these world powers, I think it's in the best interest of all of them. They all want an end to the war because a failed Ethiopia would jeopardize their interests. There's geopolitical interests, there's economic, trade, security, as well as the migrant flow towards places to the West and towards, for example, the Europe, Middle East. So it's very important that a stable Ethiopia is established. Otherwise, it could destabilize not only the Horn of Africa, but the entire African continent, which could be disastrous. It could have disastrous implications. And so, of course, they would want a government that is pro or rather conducive to their policies that matches their geopolitical interests. And then I think let me end here for now, and then maybe we can talk about if there's anything I missed, Ted and Hona, please feel free to fill in. Otherwise, maybe we can move on to representation in the negotiation, who is represented and who is not. Thank you.
I'll just add one point about what the Oromo Prosperity Party and Abiy want. I think that's the consolidation of power is very key because, as we said at the very beginning, the Oromo Prosperity Party is power, and therefore Abiy would be looking into TPLF agreeing for accepting him as a legitimate leader and also allowing him a space to consolidate its power. And this goes beyond the Oromo Prosperity Party. I think we've seen Oromo actors talking about the phase of consolidating their power, including people in the opposition saying that we have ascended to power. Now there's a phase of consolidating our power, and therefore I think the Oromo Prosperity Party will be looking into officially signing up of TPLF for that project. And I think I want to emphasize that in terms of TPLF's intention to use the negotiation process as a way of broadening the rift between Abiy and Eritrea, this is publicly said information. I think for those people who can listen Amharic, I think I would invite them to look into an interview that happened on Riot Media with Ambassador Faisal, former TPLF's diplomat. He explicitly said, we wanna have a peace with Abiy and then go on a mission of unsettling the government in Eritrea because there's support for that intention, for that project of regime change in Eritrea from the West. So it's actually a factual matter that they publicly said those things. Obviously, I think the purpose of this really widespread coverage of what each of these parties want is to really show the discrepancy in interests among these different belligerents. Because for any sustainable peace, all different interest groups should be represented at the table. that's a critical measure for potential of a peace process leading into any peace outcome. And as you can see, there's discrepancy between what the Amaras want, between what TPLF wants and Abiy wants, and Afar and Eritrea and the international community wants. And therefore, I think just from that scan, you realize that the approach that's being taken right now in terms of the peace negotiation by depicting this as Prosperity Party, Oromo Prosperity Party versus TPLF is a non-starter. It has failed from the start because the different voices, the different interests are being ignored. And this is a common mistake many international actors make when they think of peace negotiations in many countries. You cannot reduce this talking to the federal government versus TPLF because there is discrepancy of interest. There are different intended outcomes. There are different reasons why those different belligerents went into the war, and the war has become, kind of a people's war, not anymore a war between armed groups. So the representation should reflect that in a way. The international media has been making a noise about saying why the mobilization civilian are being mobilized and this has become an interethnic war and all that. Well, if you are saying that, now you should also question the decision to limit the negotiation parties into political parties, not even government. Keep in mind, TPLF is officially designated as a terrorist by the Ethiopian parliament, and any normal, well-intended process should start from, delisting, debate about delisting TPLF from a terrorist organization within the parliament, because otherwise, technically, without that delisting, anyone making interaction with TPLF could be accused of conspiring with terrorist organization, which is what the designation is intended to serve, right? And the government is even keeping it into the Prosperity Party level, even not even the executive side of the government. So I think it's like not only the representation is reduced into two parties of the war, ignoring other parties, but also even within the government, the fact that the government didn't care to delist or to debate, to get the consent of the government and have a legal ground to negotiate with TPLF, and the fact that the government didn't care to bring opposition parties into the discussion, although particularly in Amhara region, the significant mobilization of mobilization during the war happened not by the ruling party, it's actually by opposition parties such as NAMA, because they were seen as credible and people were listening to them at that point, and the significant effort was put into leveraging the legitimacy of opposition parties, civil societies to mobilize people to fight against TPLF. But when it comes to representation, the Oromo Prosperity Party is making it is like this is an affair between Prosperity Party and TPLF, and the other actors don't matter. The fact that Eritrea is now considered to be invited is actually it's a repeat of 1991, one can argue, because it was the TPLF, the Oromo Liberation Front, and the Eritrean ruling party that essentially dictated the 1991 transition in Ethiopia. So it's even for Amaras, it's even provocating, because it's a painful reminder of that period where Amaras were ignored and these three parties basically proceed on to decide on matters that affect millions of Ethiopians without kind of negotiating, without consulting majority of Ethiopians. So we do support Eritrea's engagement in the negotiation, as we keep asking Amhara should be represented, Afar should be represented. But I just wanted to note that a historical fact that if Eritrea, OPP, and TPLF end up the only negotiating parties, that in a way is a repeat of 1991, and Ethiopians know where that led us. I think. So what questions about the fact that there are Amharas in the government's negotiating team, and if those Amharas could be taken as representatives of the Amhara perspective. I think for these people, for those people who know the history of how the Mekamakon and others that are now in the position of influence within the government were brought into Ethiopian politics, have conducted their politics in the last 3 decades, anyone would recognize that they were never taken as legitimate representatives of the Amhara people. If they were legitimate representatives of the Amhara people, there would not have been the Amhara resistance in 2016, because they failed the Amharas, and the Amharas revolted, and they gave them a second chance of fixing that error, and again they proved them wrong by basically going into the wings of Abiy and broader Oromo Prosperity Party, and basically becoming servants for a new dictatorship rather than genuinely fighting for the Amhara people. So I think for those who are caring for making an argument about the Abiy being or the Mecca being an Amhara, or Temesgen being an Amhara, well, in that case you have a Tigran Ministry of Defense in Ethiopian government, and you could say the same argument. Well, then there's no need for TPLF, because if we are reducing the conversation into whose ethnicity, then basically one can argue there are Tigrans within the Ethiopian government serving within the government position, and therefore there's no need for TPLF, or the TPLF should be not given a chance in this negotiation. So I think there's that simplistic notion of like calling out people's ethnicity and saying like the Amharas are represented in that is naive approach, disregarding the historical developments in the past 3 decades, and the fact that the Amhara Prosperity Party has lost significant legitimacy even during the course of war and after the war. So it's not a proper legitimate actor. But even Amhara Prosperity Party was a legitimate representation of Amharas. One can argue this is not a matter of party. We're saying earlier this has become a people's war, and the dialogue should also reflect, the negotiation should also reflect wider representation of peoples. That is civic societies, opposition parties coming on board to give legitimacy to the process, but also ensure that the diverse interests are represented. Obviously, the post-war political rift further undermined Amhara Prosperity Party's acceptability to Amharas, and one cannot argue the same party that's prosecuting Amharas for criticizing the way the government dealt with TPLF can be a legitimate representative of Amhara's interest in the same one. I think it's just counter logical. I think so. APP is primarily concerned about their power, while Amhara people are concerned about their safety, their justice, the justice they have been aspiring for decades, and accountability for the crimes committed. And therefore, I think the fact that the negotiation is reduced to between PP versus TPLF is wrong and then starter. Another component to pick up in terms of when it comes to representation is the fact that civil society is ignored. And I think this is important because there's widespread discussion about all sides have committed crime. So if all sides have committed crime, this negotiation could be a way for these actors, even in the best case scenario of like reaching any agreement, the parties can basically seek immunity from these crimes by agreeing not to prosecute each other. And that's very concerning. That's a disservice to justice. So we need to have civil society that push for accountability for the genocide against Amharas, war crimes committed by different parties, And for that regard, I think the negotiation process should consider involving, for instance, the commission, the UN Independent Commission, because they will be doing investigation on those crimes, and also the Ethiopian, civil societies. As much as they are weak, there should be a platform, to engage the civil society and push for, their voice to be included, because they are mandated to work for justice and accountability. So I think another element that's lacking in the representativeness or inclusiveness of this negotiation is the fact that civil society is completely ignored. And this is, international experience. International experience shows that, when civil society is ignored, I think accountability is significantly limited. The Western countries' involvement, I think that is just to say that throughout the course of the war, Ethiopians have been complaining about certain countries being pro-TPLF, reproducing narratives from TPLF and all that. And I think the African Union process should protect this negotiation process from countries that are perceived or proved to be pro-TPLF, because whether they're pro-TPLF or the perception is inaccurate is adjacent to the matter. I think there's a perception, and as long as these countries, such as the West and the European Union, continue to be, the primary dictators of the process, I think many Ethiopians will be suspicious of the outcome, even if it is a positive outcome, which is unlikely. So I think there should be, a distance of the process and more control of the African Union over the process, rather than, Western countries dictating or heavily influencing the process. In terms of the African Union mandated, process, I think we are aware of TPLF asking for a particular individual, which is Kenyatta, and there's a possibility of Kenyatta being a young person and coming to regional politics. It might be, we might see Kenyatta being involved in this negotiation, even under the auspices of the African Union. But I think we're very concerned about him, particularly because there is a historical precedent that would make us to believe his impartiality. And this is the fact that, a TPLF-led government was the prime mobilizer of African countries to requesting to drop Uhuru Kenyatta's case at the international community, at the International Court of Crimes, the ICC, back in 2012 and 2013. He was accused of crimes, and he was investigated. Him and his deputy were investigated, and Ethiopia at that time, TPLF-led government, was really heavily involved in lobbying the ICC to drop the case, and the African countries even boycott the ICC and withdraw from the treaty that gives mandate to ICC. And I think we believe that's a very personal matter that has serious consequences to Kenyatta. And I think Kenyatta, because of that history and his unique personal support he received from TPLF-led government for that process, we believe that he's implicated and he's not partial. So we support the African Union process, but we are aware of why TPLF is heavily relying on or pushing for Kenyatta to be to lead that process. And I think we have a question about his partiality. In terms of maybe scenarios quickly, I think the best case scenario, TPLF agrees to accountability and accepts Wolkite Raya as Amhara land, but that's very unlikely because one, TPLF obviously has no history of settling any difference through negotiation during their insurgency, or even after coming to the government, coming to power. One can look into what they did to OLF in the early 90s, when the same story when they were negotiating with CUD, or Kenichetas popularly known among Ethiopians, post 2005, they will always negotiate with the intention of using the process to further eliminate the enemy. And therefore, given the discrepancy in interest and the history and the culture of TPLF, and also, Oromo's Prosperity's intention to use the negotiation process to further behold Amhara Prosperity members or further weaken Amharas as adversaries. I think we don't expect this best scenario of TPLF accepting the fact that Volkaitin Raya Amaras and agreeing to accountability mechanism. The likely scenarios are either negotiation fails and fighting resumes, or a new alliance between OPP and TPLF against Amaras. So essentially a new alliance against Amaras and possibly Eritreans, resulting in a new alliance to continue the war. And I think that's why we are very much concerned about the process. Maybe I think we'll take a couple of questions Alastair and Robel had, and then I think we're running out. Like, I'm realizing this has taken longer, but it was really important for us to show the discrepancy in what everyone is trying to achieve through the process and as an outcome. So yeah, hopefully we'll give more time for the audience in terms of addressing questions that came through our Twitter inbox or even accepting some people to speak. So I'll yield the mic to Robel and Ted.
Thanks. Go ahead, Ted.
No, I was just going to say there's nothing really from my side, but just so that the everyone is aware, you can submit questions related to both or ask questions or give your comments related to both the ICHREE investigation or the negotiations process.
Great. Just before we go to questions, Ted, do you want to do like a quick just a concluding thing, or we just have like a call to action?
I think we can do that maybe after the Q&A, because I just want to, because as Honi was saying, we've spent quite a bit of time kind of like unpacking those two topics. So let's go to Q&A and then we can, in terms of like the call to action, I can cover that a little bit later.
Okay. In that case, we have a few questions. I can see already. So maybe should I go one by one, guys, or is it better if I just list off a couple at a time?
Maybe a couple at a time. I think that would be better.
Yeah.
Okay. So the first one was, did AAA or any other group try to set up Amhara representatives to represent Amhara for negotiations, like the Walkite Identity Committee or other Amhara civic associations in Ethiopia? And then followed by the UN Commission opened a portal to submit evidence, which anyone can utilize. How can we be sure the evidence is not submitted from our adversaries to mislead the investigator and tamper with the outcome? Let's start with those two. Whoever wants to take any.
All right. I'll start with the first one, and then you guys can chime in. And Hone, I'll lobby the second question over to you. In terms of the first one, as AAA, we've been having conversations with different Amhara organizations, from opposition political parties, civil society members, as about the negotiations and the implications, that it will have on Amaras for the foreseeable future. And these discussions have been, very good, as well as with the State Department and National Security Council about the process of the negotiation, how, we feel Amaras view this negotiation process, the concerns that we have with the negotiation, and the fact that we believe that Amaras are being excluded from this process, and that, the intended outcome of having a long-term peace will not be achieved if Amaras and the other actors are excluded. In terms of like putting forth, entities that we believe would support the interests of Amaras. We have had this discussion with the interested parties and have submitted names of organizations to those that are involved in the process. Now, as you all know, Amaras are still excluded from the process, but this is not something that we're going to give up on, because we believe that it is in the best interest of Amaras, it's in the best interest of Ethiopia and the region that Amaras are not excluded in the process. But we are actively working on this, and our continuously pushing for an inclusive process. But at this time, we can't, uh, we can't reveal the names of these of the organizations.
I'll take the second question. I think about the possibility of, basically misinformation through that portal for the commission. I think that can happen. Would be unfortunate. People intentionally try to do that, but it could happen. But it wouldn't impact the process very much. Partly because the intention of collecting that evidence is really for scoping purpose to really, at least from what I understand, it's going to be, to take stock of how many incidents, which areas, which the commission should investigate. It does not mean, the evidence that was submitted will be accepted one way or another without vetting. Obviously, that's what independent investigation is, and they have, they will receive different information from different actors. Not every submission is taken equally, or we hope so. But there's the intention is to broadly inform what atrocities have happened and which ones they should investigate as a commission. But once they identify those, they have a team of, like, as any normal independent investigation, they will have forensic experts, they will have gender advisor, children advisor, military advisor, and all that. And this set of experts is intended to validate and verify information. So the possibility is there, but it wouldn't. Our hope is and believe is it will not necessarily impact the final reporting in any way. I think if that happens, there's always a chance to highlight that, and that's one of the intentions why we keep engaging with them. But it's not a major concern because there will be vetting and examination of evidence to complement their own primary data collection.
Yeah, and one thing I want to add is that in terms of like the discussion or the engagement with the ICHRE and AAA, this is a regular ongoing communication. It's not it was not a one-time submission of our reports, but several meetings that we've had, and continued engagement and continued regular engagement with the commission as they're conducting their investigation. So we are actively are engaged in communicating with this team.
Great. Thank you, Ted and Hona. I think we addressed the first two questions. I saw that our friend Simo had raised his hand before. Simo, if you have a question, please, you've been invited up, now you can speak. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much, and sorry for joining a little bit late. So thank you for all the information. I think it was very, very informative and very concise. Thanks for a very excellent briefing. For me, of course, the situation is such that if you are familiar with my thinking, is that TPLF should not be rewarded in any case on any kind of negotiation, that there should have been a military defeat because there was political action by violent means, so it shouldn't be rewarded by negotiations. But I think we are facing reality here, and this is what the current government today is doing, that there is preparation for negotiations, as you excellently explained. My question is kind of, I understand the red lines very well, and I understand the suffering that particularly Amhara are facing currently in contemporary Ethiopia. So my question is that if there is compromises, in the spirit of compromise, that what kind of issues? I understand that there is question of impunity, question of reparations, all kind of difficult questions, but what kind of compromises from the Amhara constituency could be done to kind of extend the hand of goodwill. I understand the realism that we are dealing with, especially with TPLF and other violent actors in Ethiopia. We're dealing with entities that can be rewarded with zero confidence and trust. But in any case, in the spirit of peace, as we say, that there should be, the saying in Finnish goes that there should be a thin peace is better than big war. So maybe that's my kind of like what room for compromise there exists, if any. I understand if there is not much appetite, but in any case, thank you.
Thank you, Simo. Ted, did you want to take that question?
I think why not we take like 2 or 3 questions, right? I think there's Rekik has been promoted to speak, so let's take Rekik's question and then we can respond to Simo as well.
Hi, Rekik. If you'd like to ask your question, please unmute your mic and you can ask your question.
Okay. Yeah, we can go ahead, I think, and answer this question. Ted, do you want me to start or?
Sure, go ahead, Hone.
Yeah, thanks, Simo. I think that's a good question, and partly a challenging one, because this is obviously we're speaking from a perspective of people and not as a negotiation team, and those tones are different. But I think in terms of compromise, given the atrocities that Amhara people are enduring, and the crackdown against Amaras, I think there's already a compromise that has been made in even agreeing to give the chance TPLF for a peaceful resolution of the war. I think that is perhaps the most generous kind of compromise I think the Amhara people have made, because this is a party that officially, depict Amaras as their enemies and never missed a minute to crack down them in their 3 decades of power, and also make sure everyone else co-signs their project of ethnic apartheid and suppress Amaras. And I think the Amhara people have been very generous even to the other parties, including the Oromo Prosperity Party, to stay on power. Even what's happening, knowing that they are complicit and basically are perpetrators of the Amhara Genocide. There's enough ground to really, one, challenge the need of the continuity of the state. Second, the viability of staying, even recognizing the authority of this ongoing government and the TPLF as well. So I think that compromise from Amaras is recognizing that, one, I think a stronger Ethiopia might be better for everyone, not just for Amaras, but also second, recognizing the fact that regardless of what happens, regardless of the continuity of the state, we're going to be neighbors. Geography cannot change. We cannot change the geography, and we have to accept it. And therefore, never in the spirit of never-nearness, I think Amaras have already given TPLF a chance in 2016 to redeem itself. That didn't work out. Same chance they are giving it now, and I just cannot imagine people being prosecuted, being killed. What kind of compromise? What else we could give? We're the demand is we're presenting I'm an Amhara. Let me be an Amhara. and live peacefully in Walkite and Raja. There's no less than that a human being can ask, I'm an Amhara. Allow me to exist and survive. That's a question of Amharas in Wallaga. And that's the bare minimum question any human being can ask, right? So I think there has already been generosity from Amhara side to, give the TPLF and OPP and others, a chance to redeem themselves. And this is just another round, and therefore that compromise is already made from the Amhara side, and partly is in a way contributing for them to be, taken for granted by certain actors, which is why we're saying, sustainable peace requires listening to Amharas, or else there's nothing else Amharas would do other than defending themselves, because just sitting in and dying wouldn't be an option. And there's patients have been patient for the last 3 decades. They now are, being patient. But if that doesn't yield anything that will allow them to be who they are in Walkite and Raja, that will allow them to live and exist in many parts of Ethiopia, in Wallaga and Oromia, I cannot imagine, Amharas agreeing to just sit idle and die, because that would be the next compromise, and that compromise wouldn't make any sense. So I think in a nutshell, there has already been compromise made from Amhara side, and it's the other side, I think, that really look themselves in the mirror and look into what kind of crimes that are being committed, and obviously on top of that, I think when we are calling for accountability, there are, rumors of, or implicate accusations of certain actors, primarily the government forces, in a nutshell, in crimes against Amharas and others. So we're not asking accountability for only TPLF. We're asking for accountability for everyone, and that's, I think, another second compromise that Amharas are offering. I'll stop there and let the rest speak.
I think you made a very good point, Mahone. I think sometimes when we talk about especially the Walkite issue and the Raya issue, there's a tendency to look at it as maybe a rigidness on the Amhara side in terms of compromising. But I think the real issue is that it's not just about coexistence and racism, discrimination. The last time the Amharas in Walkite were administered under Tigrayans, basically there was a genocide. So even in the context of the war, if we look at the beginning of the war, one of the first things the TPLF did was they committed the Maikadra massacre of 1,515 Amhara civilians in the Walkite area, specifically in Maikadra town. And so this was easily the single worst atrocity of the war. And I think it illustrates, firstly, what TPLF is, because there's a clear tendency to not just oppress Amharas, but want to basically ethnically cleanse them and massacre them and kill them. And it's important that it took a lot for Amharas to get to this stage. And there were repeated, appeals to actually resolve the issue peacefully. There was the Walkite Amhara Identity Restoration Committee, the Walkite Tagade Restoration Committee. And the work of that committee was basically to appeal to the TPLF to have the identity of Walkite respected during their reign. And this was done by peaceful means, but TPLF in response actually responded by pursuing these and persecuting the members of this committee, killing them, threatening their families. And I think this kind of shows that there was already goodwill to cover this peacefully in a very fair way by the Amhara side, but this was essentially rejected. And then in the end, even prior to the war, there was even rhetoric of not only refusal to give up Walkite, but actually threats to annex more land. So to actually annex parts of Western Gondar and basically take the entire Amhara border with Sudan. So down from Walkite down to taking Armacho, Kwara, Matama, all the way down to the Benishangul Gumuz region. And so this mentality of just land grabbing, ethnic cleansing, and genocide, the primary victims of this policy were the Amharas, historically under TPLF, and currently now under the new the Oromo Prosperity regime. And so the Welkite issue, it's a very close issue for the Amharas. It's very important, and it took a lot to get to this point. And so now I think there's a very there's an opportunity for the TPLF leadership to actually try and broker peace, because the request is not so big. It's basically just this land. Give up your demand for land that isn't yours, and then we can make peace. The Amharas have offered that hand, so I think the ball is in their court, and hopefully, the mentality of warmongering and wanting to invade and pillage and land grab will go away for the best interests of both peoples, because the Amhara people have no hatred against the Tigrayan people. There were many efforts for reconciliation post 2016, but this effort was basically undermined when the war was started, and then TPLF came and then resumed their policy of genocide and wanting to return to central power to reclaim Addis, and then no one knows what they would have done. There could have been multiple more Maikadras if they had come back to central power. So that's how I would say it. Ted, if you have anything to add.
No, I mean, in terms of like what Amharas can compromise, I think both of you covered it well, but I think that's why it's important for Amharas to be at the negotiating table, and there is a way for Amharas to be at that negotiating table and to represent their interests and their concerns, and that's what we have been pushing for a very long time, and that's what we will continue to push, and that's I think what all Amharas should continue to campaign and push for, because. For Amharas, the implications are huge for us if we allow this process to go through the way it is right now. It's basically being trapped in both ways. This is not going to mean the end of this war. It's just it would mean the continuation of a war, but in a different way. And so that's why I think we need to continue to campaign for the Amharas to be in this negotiating table, to speak for ourselves, to negotiate properly, and to seek a way out of this suffering that our people have suffered for over 30 years now.
Great. So thank you, Ted. Simo, I hope that addresses the question. I think now we had one other question that was related to one of our previous questions. And I think it was regarding the submission to the UN Commission portal, or just UN submission, evidence submission in general. And the question was just, please address people submitting unreliable evidence without meaning to harm the investigation. So that's one question. Let me see if there's any others I can see. And then there was a question about the difference between the independent investigations and UN intervention. So there was one person who was just confused about the difference between the independent investigations and UN intervention. So those are the two questions for now. Ted or Hona, if either of you want to jump on one of those.
Yeah, I can do on the fact that unreliable information would be submitted. I think people need to have a realistic expectation of what the submission is serve. They're not going to be accepted as they are submitted. As I mentioned earlier, this is intended to inform the commission, because it will be helpful to know communities' perspective on which atrocities deserve investigation and what's the evidence and all that. But that does not mean the information will be taken as valid by the independent commission. They have a principle of reasonable ground to believe as a basis of their investigation, which means the information they have should be confirmed by multiple sources and supplemented by other kinds of evidences. Right, so keep submitting information. focus on what you can do rather than speculating what else others might do. And, that will add value. But, don't be, as I mentioned, those kind of things could happen, but it will not impact. It will not impact the final outcome. I think that's what we hope. In terms of information and verified, less unverified, and all that. Generally, a principle is submit what you have and be transparent about obviously what you know and what you don't know. But it's helpful to share information because that information could itself be verified by the commission itself. So instead of withholding any information, I would encourage people to submit whatever information they have and see where that goes on. So the suggestion is, as far as you have an evidence of or a report to share and you're pretty confident about its truthfulness, submit it, and the commission will deal with that. I cannot speak on behalf of the commission. What's their process, how they treat that's up to them. But I think normally, as any investigation that comes, any investigation process will kind of gather information and then verify. And as I mentioned, there is already a methodological choice they made, which is a reasonable ground to believe. So it's not the information that doesn't come will not be necessarily accepted as a fact before it's verified and complemented with a different kind of evidence. In terms of independent investigation versus the UN intervention, I think independent investigation is what its name says. It's an investigation. It's intended to establish facts about the crimes committed, who are the victims, who was affected, who are responsible, the perpetrators, and all that. So that's an important document. And in this context, in the mandate of the commission, beyond that, they are given a mandate of recommending the Ethiopian government to implement transitional justice process and what that looks like based on their findings. And of course, they also say the mandate is the commission has the mandate to retain evidence, including its own reporters, for future accountability purposes. So that means the UN may base this investigation to initiate other processes of accountability. But that is, a further a step beyond the investigation, and it's something. It has its own, politics with the UN, international relations, geopolitical interests, and all that. If we want to, the nitty-gritty of the basis, how the possible UN intervention into a country happens, we can go into that. But I think at this point that there's no ground to discuss that, because the first step would be to establish facts about what's happening. The intention is to really investigate what has happened, and based on that, the UN can initiate its own separate process about investigation and about accountability, which rarely leads into any form of intervention. The UN intervention is highly political. It's not dictated by human rights concerns, as often people assume, and therefore I think it's a far-fetched topic to discuss at this point. Thank you.
Okay, so I think all questions were addressed. Unless there's any more additional questions from either of your ends, guys, maybe we can move on to just the last part, just concluding remarks and just a call to action.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think if there aren't any more questions, we can just try to wrap up this discussion. One of the things that I do want to say, and this is something that we discuss, regularly, within the team, is that as Amharas, we have to really be very, very strategic. The situation, I guess, the world order is changing, and that really is a benefit for us, right? It gives us really an opportunity. There's a lot of interest right now that's going on in Ethiopia, in the broader Horn, with the the situation in the world, and for us being dispersed globally across the world, it really gives us an opportunity with the momentum that we have in the Amhara movement, as more and more Amharas are joining the movement, globally, as we all have witnessed. It gives us an opportunity to really, increase the capacity of our diplomacy, not just here within the U.S., but even outside of the U.S. We've been working hard here in the U.S. and we've been making some gains in Canada, but we need to expand that globally, and make friends, and and educate these global policymakers about what's happening to Amhara people in Ethiopia, what's going on in Ethiopia, in the region, and providing our solutions, and so that these solutions, these policies, can be part of the foreign policy objective of these different various countries. And I think when what we've been doing here in the U.S. is starting to now to be duplicated in other parts of the country, in other parts of the countries, as globally we're working together, we're interfacing more, and we're really synchronizing, our efforts. One of the things that we have to be realistic about is that we have to prepare for a potential conflict. There is a good chance that these negotiations are not going to materialize into an agreement between these two parties, because the stakeholders are greater than the TPLF and the Abiy administration, right? As we said earlier, so the potential for a conflict is really is real. It's on the horizon, and we need to prepare for that as a people, and prepare for what that type of conflict might be, so that we can really reduce the risk of further suffering of Amaras, in the next in the next 6 months or so. Long term, we really have to build our capacity and bring more and more and more young leaders into this movement. As AAA, we have young college interns that are doing amazing job, that are helping us out. The Amara organizations that are out there globally, you really should bring in these young college interns, these young people into the fold, so we can we can help build the next generation of Amara leaders, and really, and also right now in the short term, we did a very good job of establishing the Amara Emergency Fund and raising $2 million. We need to continue to build our financial capacity, as I said earlier, because we don't know what's coming in the horizon. There will be, we believe, an outbreak of war, but we don't know how big that war might be. And so because of that, we need to prepare to support our people in every way possible, especially in their humanitarian needs, so that they can so they don't have to suffer the suffering that they felt the past the past 3 decades. So I think there's a lot of opportunities here. What we're asking people is really find your local Amara organization and join, be active, contribute. For those of you who live here in the United States, the midterm elections are coming up. We're asking you to please be engaged. Contact your congressional members, your senators. Request a meeting in May. No, in September, in early September, AAA is going to be hosting a congressional virtual fly-in across the state, where we're going to have Amaras across the country, meeting with their congressional representatives, virtually. This is something that we do on a regular basis, but this is going to be at a much larger scale. And so we're doing this to educate our, members of Congress about what's happening. And this is really an opportune time because the election is coming up. And one of the things that we also ask Amaras to do, individually, is that contribute to those members of Congress that are running for election, that are being vocal about what's happening to Amaras. There are members of Congress out there. There are candidates also that are out there running for office. And so you can support their campaign financially. You can volunteer. You can also donate to Amara PAC, and Amara PAC is making donations to these, to these campaigns. So there are many ways that you can help and assist. In addition, so that people are aware that, the Amara Emergency Fund, FANA, and CASA in Canada, are supporting independent Amhara organizations in Ethiopia, regularly. We're working very closely together. There is, collaboration that is happening on a regular basis, and this is to help build the capacity of these Amhara organizations in Ethiopia. So, and one quick thing for those of you who live in cities and states where there is an Amhara organization, it doesn't require hundreds of people. It just requires a small group of committed individuals who do care. So come together, bring your efforts, and establish Amhara organizations, and then come and collaborate with us. We want to work with you. That's really all that I had. Hone and Robel, I'll turn it over to you guys.
Thank you, Ted. I know we said we were concluding with questions, but I see that we have one more person who's requested to join, and we had one other person, I think, in our messages. So maybe we can give an opportunity to Gedamu. Gedamu, if you have a question, please go ahead. Gedamu, if you have a question, please unmute your mic, and then you can ask your question. Okay. Otherwise, there was this one last question from one person who was wondering, does AAA plan to fight against abolishing the Constitution? Is there another reason there is not a lot of voice requesting the Constitution amendment? So if either of you, Ted or Hona, wanted to comment on AAA's views towards the Constitution. Thank you. And this will be the final question.
Maybe I'll start, and then Ted, you can go after me. I think a simple answer is, I think, for the person who requested this question to look into our work. We've been very vocal about the Constitution and the fact that we think the constitutional order in Ethiopia is an ethnic apartheid, just like there was racial apartheid in South Africa. There's an intention to categorize people based on their identity. There is that intention of attaching people to a particular land and not welcoming these people when they are in their proper land. There's an idea of building supremacy based on identity, and so there is ideology, but also institutional setup to build an ethnic apartheid. And essentially, Ethiopia is an ethnic apartheid and has been for 3 decades. And we have always been very vocal about this, saying that as long as this constitution continues, as long as Ethiopia continues to be an ethnic apartheid, there will never be peace, because it's a source of the conflict, this conflict. But also, if you see the history of conflict over decades in Ethiopia, the frequency, intensity, and casualty of conflicts in Ethiopia basically skyrocketed over the last 3 decades. And the fact that genocide is happening, that civilians are targeted, is ultimate representation of where this system is going and leading Ethiopians. So I think not only the constitution should be amended, it should be completely reimagined, because many people don't realize it, I think, but what the 1991 TPLF and OLF led transition or constitutional process did was, first of all, effectively dismantle Ethiopia. So the Ethiopia most people have in their imagination, people saying it's centuries old and all that, that Ethiopia was dismantled officially in 1991 by OLF and TPLF. And the document says reconstitute Ethiopia. And the new Ethiopia is made up of these nation and nationalities that have almost every right, at least on paper, and they're formulating an Ethiopia that will only continue if all these ethnic groups or nations, as they call it, but I think at AAA we don't call it nations, because nation is bigger than an ethnic group, and it's an implication of a potential of becoming a viable state. But many of the ethnic groups in Ethiopia are not nations, because they can really hardly be viable to be an independent nation state. But they named it multinational federation, and they say Ethiopia's continuity, and the federal government's power emanates from the consent these different ethnic groups hold or give to on behalf of them. So there's that Ethiopia is already reimagined and reconfigured, and TPLF and OLF know what they were doing, because they were always looking for a way to secede from Ethiopia, or at least, if Ethiopia is not serving their interests, but most Ethiopians don't. So I think we say the constitution is a process of dismantling a country. It's not a document of building a country. It's not a nation building project or a constitutional order. It's a constitutional order to dismantle Ethiopia, and that's what in reality we're seeing. The way PP is handling the matters in the country, one can hardly argue that there is Ethiopia. Like, how many the state capacity has completely diminished. The state has become primarily engaged in prosecuting its citizens and never cared about its national interest or sovereignty, and therefore, the state is hardly viable now. So it was inevitable. It's an inevitable outcome of that constitutional process that we are in this predicament of civil war and weakened Ethiopia and Amhara genocide and other kinds of atrocities. So I think we're one of the strong groups, always pushing Western countries to look at the root cause of the problem in Ethiopia rather than treating the symptoms. And for those people who are interested, I think look what Abiy Ali tried to do when he was when he fell out with Abiy. He tried to basically create his own country or secede from Ethiopia. Same way TPLF did. The difference is TPLF was more organized. They have a lot of resources they embezzled, and a lot of connections they built during their power, during the 30 decades they were in power, and they were able to basically challenge the federal government. But the threat for the continuity of Ethiopia is coming from different countries, because that's what the constitution system or the current constitution is intended to do. It's serving the purpose it is created. And for anyone who wants to see continuity of Ethiopia, you would have to not only amend the constitution, reimagine the constitutional process in a way that reaffirms the fact that this is one country and not confederation of different nation states. I'll stop there, but this is a topic that we can bring forward and maybe have a separate space, because we have I and the entire AAA team has a lot to say on this.
This is something that we believe majority of Amaras have a consensus on in terms of how we view the Constitution, and Hone has covered it. And one of the things that we continue to do and push is educate policymakers, think tanks, when we meet with them, about the underlying causes of the problems that Ethiopia is facing, and the foundation of all these problems is this ethnic apartheid system. And when many observers, not Ethiopians, when they look at Ethiopia, when they look at the war, they don't understand, they don't look into the governance system. They read these articles by these Western journalists, and and these articles do not cover what the underlying causes really are. And in some cases, actually, some of these Western journalists, they don't even understand themselves. If you speak to them, you'd be shocked in terms of how little they understand about the governance system of Ethiopia, of this ethnic apartheid system. And many of these journalists also do not live in Ethiopia. So they don't have that. It's hard for them to see it, to understand it. because they're writing these articles remotely. They're not in the country. If they were in the country at least and have an opportunity to speak to Ethiopians of different ethnic groups, they might be able to have some level of understanding of this ethnic apartheid system, the impact on the day-to-day lives of regular Ethiopian citizens, and then also really on the country as a whole. And unfortunately, even for some of these journalists that are in Ethiopia, they're only in Addis. They don't venture outside of Addis Ababa. So, if you don't go into, Welega or other parts of Oromia and speak to Amaras, Benshangul Gumas, it's hard for you to really understand the impact of this constitution on Ethiopians. So we do regularly call this out, but we also ask and challenge, policymakers to call out this ethnic apartheid system in the same way that they called out the apartheid system in South Africa. If a apartheid system that's that serves white South Africans is bad, then an apartheid system that serves the interests of particular ethnic groups in an African country should also be called out and should also be considered as bad. And so we challenge them in that way. Some of these members of Congress that we speak to understand and they recognize it, but they're just not there yet to call out the system, even though they actually think it is a terrible system. But they just don't want to call it out yet because they're concerned and they're afraid of the pushback. And so one of the things that you all can do is when you're speaking to your congressional representative, or if you live in Europe or Canada, you're member of parliament, is demand that they call out the system. And so if enough of us are doing that, then it can put pressure on really on uh, uh, the Ethiopian government officials, as Hone was saying, to reimagine a new constitution and new framework of governance in Ethiopia. So, I think all of us have an obligation to do that. But this is not just AAA that has been calling out the system. I would say majority, probably 99% of Amara organizations have been calling out the system for a very long time. And there are also not Amaras that do not like the system, and because it does not benefit majority of Ethiopians. Just a few of the elites and some of the ethnic groups that have benefited from it. Okay, with that said, Roybal, I think just wrap us up and then we'll close it out.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you, Ted. Thank you, Hona. Thank you, Simo, and everyone else that asked questions. I think we had a very productive session. For all of you who couldn't finish the whole space, just keep in mind that it's going to be recorded, or it is recorded. So you may visit and listen to the recording using the link that you used to join the space. Otherwise, keep following AAA on Twitter and Facebook for more updates. On Twitter, that's AAA_Amhara, and on Facebook, that's AAA.Amhara. If you have any questions, concerns, if you have input, anything that you would like to inform our team of, please just reach out to AAA via email. You may do so at info@amharaamerica.org. As Ted said, there's going to be a lot of initiatives coming up in the coming weeks, so please stay tuned for more updates. There's also going to be another Twitter Space session after this one that's going to be focusing on some of the fundraising work done through Wenfel and Amhara Emergency Fund. So please stay tuned for that. I don't think it's going to be started yet, but yeah, thank you. I think I have nothing more to say. So thank you, Hona, Ted. I think we can close out.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you for coming on, and keep sending any question or suggestion, as Robert said. Yeah, but thanks for moderating the discussion as in addition to your role, Rob.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Have a good rest of your day.